In 1890, the U.S. Congress authorized Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park, the first such park in the United States. Chickamauga was the second bloodiest battle of the Civil War, ranking behind only Gettysburg. A federal commission invited state governments to fund and construct monuments throughout the park, each of which tells a story. It was finally dedicated in 1895. Today, the Visitor Center displays a large collection of military weapons, and visitors can see a film and exhibits about the battles. A 7-mile automobile tour winds through Chickamauga battlefield. In the summer of 1863, the Confederate Army was desperate after disastrous losses at Gettysburg and Vicksburg, and now Union General William Rosecrans had outmaneuvered the rebel army to take control of the city of Chattanooga, Tennessee. Union control of Chattanooga severed strategic Confederate supply lines because it was at the crossroads of 4 major railroads. After this, Rosecrans had assumed that the demoralized Confederate troops would retreat, but Confederate General Braxton Bragg instead rallied his troops across the nearby Georgia border and received reinforcements. General Bragg hoped to destroy the Union Army and recapture Chattanooga for the Confederacy. On September 18, 1863, General Bragg's troops crossed Chickamauga Creek towards Chattanooga. Meanwhile, the Union troops under Rosecrans built breastworks of logs, rails, and earth to defend against the attacks that would surely come the next morning. On September 19th, the Battle of Chickamauga began in earnest. General Bragg attacked aggressively and received reinforcements with the arrival of divisions commanded by General James Longstreet. The Confederates now outnumbered the Federal troops. They made some progress but could not break through the Union lines. Meanwhile, cold and thirst plagued the Union troops. It was unusually chilly, and with the enemy so near, campfires were prohibited, and the Confederates were blocking their access to Chickamauga Creek and other sources of water. In the center of the Battle of Chickamauga was a farm owned by George and Mary Brotherton, where they grazed cattle and grew corn and hay. Their sons Tom and Jim served in the Confederate Army. Tom told his brother Jim, "It's a sorry lad that won't fight for his own home." Tom was especially valuable as a scout for General Longstreet because he knew every pig trail through these woods. During the battle, the Brothertons and other local families took refuge in a ravine about a mile away, enduring hunger and cold and praying for their boys in the Confederate Army. After the battle, Adeline Brotherton, the youngest daughter, returned to the cabin in search of food. Finding 4 of their cows who had somehow survived the battle, she prepared milk for the refugee families as well as for hundreds of wounded Union and Confederate soldiers. This monument honors Union Colonel John Wilder's famous Lightning Brigade. They were armed with the cutting-edge weapon of the day, the Spencer repeating rifle, which allowed a soldier to fire an average of 14 to 20 rounds per minute. On the second day of the battle, Wilder successfully defended the left side of the Union troops. But in the middle of the Union line, Confederates led by Generals Hood and Longstreet poured through a large gap in the Union line and scattered and pushed them back. But Union General George Thomas, in a heroic move that would earn him the name the Rock of Chickamauga, took over command and began consolidating the scattered Union forces on Horseshoe Ridge and Snodgrass Hill. He and his men formed a defensive position, and the Federal troops held firm. Thomas retreated as darkness fell. The Union troops were forced back to Chattanooga. It was a Confederate victory. In 1863, George Snodgrass and his family of 9 lived in a log house here. On the second day of the Battle of Chickamauga, Union forces made a desperate stand in the woods and fields surrounding the cabin, forcing the Snodgrass family to take cover in a nearby ravine with other refugees. Thousands fell as Confederates attacked the Union positions on Snodgrass Hill that afternoon. It was some of the war's bloodiest fighting, and the Snodgrass cabin was filled with the wounded. That evening, the Federals evacuated, leaving behind many wounded who could not be moved. For several days, injured soldiers from both sides were treated here. Army doctors found it difficult to deal with the great number of casualties and the horrific wounds. Amputation was the standard treatment for arms or legs that were smashed by bullets or shells. The cabin was filled with blood and screams. Casualties at the Battle of Chickamauga were enormous. The Union Army suffered 1,657 killed, 9,756 wounded, and 4,757 captured or missing. The Confederate troops suffered 2,312 killed, 14,674 wounded, and 1,468 captured or missing. Rosecrans's army had withdrawn into Chattanooga on September 20th, while the Confederates held key positions surrounding the city, including Lookout Mountain and Missionary Ridge. Their intention was to starve the Union Army into submission with the siege of Chattanooga. But after a month of hunger, Union General Ulysses S. Grant arrived with reinforcements to open a supply line into the city. On November 23rd, thousands of Union soldiers marched out of Chattanooga, defeating the Confederates at Orchard Knob on November 23rd, Lookout Mountain on November 24th, and Missionary Ridge on November 25th. The Confederate troops retreated south into Georgia, and the fall of Chattanooga was complete.